Hey guys, welcome to my next C# beginner tutorial, and this is going to be part 3. And we're going to be looking at if statements or what we call conditional statements. So if you do one thing, or if you reach a particular sort of condition, we might do one thing, we might do another, or we might do something else. And now this is very important with doing a lot of things in games where you need to check, say, every frame. And you need to do it constantly within your game because you need to check if you've found a key, if you've reached a particular value, if you've reached a particular score, and then you might complete the game, you might lose the game. It's very dependent on what type of game you're creating and what you want to make. So I will go into the sort of basics of doing it, because once you have this, you can do a hell of a lot of things with it. So what we'll do is we'll create a new C# script, and we'll call this conditional. Then we'll open up in MonoDevelop. And now when we're in MonoDevelop, like I always like to do, is I'll just move this curly bracket down, and I will get rid of all the sort of information within the two beginning curly brackets, so then we can start from the fresh. So now we're going to start writing our script. So first of all, more often than not, is that you can use an if statement anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a update method, but that's the most common place probably to actually put it. But I'll show you a few examples as I go along. So we'll start by writing void update, then we'll have two brackets, and then below there we'll have two curly brackets. And if you've seen in the previous video, you always need a left and a right facing curly bracket to encapsulate everything. And I like to just format my code like this to make it nice and manageable. So I'll go through the very basic types of conditional statements that we'll use I use in programming. So we'll have if, else if, and else. And these are pretty much, they do a similar thing, but they all do it in a slightly different way. If I give a brief example, is that if you start with an if statement, you're saying that if you give it a particular condition, so if we've reached a particular score, then we'll do something. If you put an else if after your first if statement, it will run through the code in execution order, line by line, and say if our score is 100, do something. If, say, we've got an else if after it, and it says else if score is 50, then we can do something else. Because unless it meets a particular conditional statement, it will move on to the next one. And else is just a nice one to end it. So say if you've got several if statements all the way down here saying if it's 150 or whatever else statement can just say if it isn't any of the things that you've already done, do this. So it could just mean if your score is not 100, then you can just have an else statement and say that if it isn't any of the stuff above, do that. But I'll go into this more thoroughly as we go along. So we'll start by doing this. So we'll say that if, and we'll start by writing score is, and we can set equal to 50. Then we can close that bracket up and add two curly brackets in below there. And like I say, I like to keep them below each other to make it apparent. And now we'll start by writing our variable. So we'll make it a public variable, and we will make it an integer, and we will call this score just like we had there, and add a semicolon. So what this is saying is that if score is equal to 50, and a double equals just means that if it's directly equal to that, then we can say debug.log, open brackets in quotes, then we can write score is 50. And if you see my other video, you'll see that debug.log just pops it up in the reporter at the bottom. So that's all well and good. So all it's saying, this will check 30. So if it's really FPS dependent. So if you're running at 30 frames per second, it's going to be checked 30 times every second. So it'll check if the score is equal to 50, then it'll do this. Then what we could do is we could say that if score is then equal to, say, 40, we could do something else. And again, I will have the if statements, and then I'll have my statement that I want to check within 2 normal brackets and then 2 curly brackets below. And then we can pretty much do the same thing and say that debug.log, now your score is equal to 40. And say we test this in our game. I go to my first person controller, I add my conditional script there. You can see that score is equal to 0. You can see that there's nothing appeared at the bottom down here. Now my score, when it is equal to 0, it does nothing. Now if I set my score to 50, press enter, you can see that score is 50, and you can see that because it's in the update function, it's giving me this report every single 30 times every second. So it's telling me, yeah, we've got to 50, we can do that. Now if I set that to 40, you will notice that score is now equal to 40, and we're just checking each time that it does something. But it's better not to use a debug line for something like that. You'll want to set a win parameter, let's say, and so you can move to another scene if you reach a particular score, or have a new objective. Now another way we could do it is that we could say if score is equal to 50, we can do that. Then we can change this if statement to an else if statement. And what that means is that it's either if it's this or else if, and else if is just slightly more refined in terms of the programming behind it, and it will match itself to the conditional statement above. Because if we just had lots and lots of if statements, that's slightly slower than having the else if according to the first one. And let's, for instance, then we can below here, I will show you the else statement, else, and we don't actually need to write anything within brackets for an else statement. So what we can do is just put the 2 curly brackets below again, and we'll say else. Now we'll say debug.log, and your score is, let's say, 0, for instance. So if it's not 50 and it's not 40, it will do this. So once we start our game, we expect to see that it reports that score is 0, because we're not matching any of the 2 conditionals. Now if we have it 50, score is now 50. If we set it to 40, score is now 40. And we can stop that running and go back into here. And like I said, you can do it in any other type of function. So like I showed in the other tutorial, you can say void on trigger enter, collider other, then 2 brackets below, and then we can say that if, like I mentioned in the other tutorial, other dot compare tag in brackets player, close that up. See, we're doing an actual statement here, and we're saying that if the collider we're running into finds this player, then we will do whatever is in between the curly brackets. So we're saying that if it is and finds the player, we'll do this. And it's just a way to refine your amount of coding and to make it so that you can only do a certain amount of things when you want to. So you can do it in your own functions, you can do it in the on trigger, you could even have another if statement here, and then you could start writing and managing variables and checking that if you've hit this player and you're a particular variable value, then you can achieve something. So I'll give you an example, is that if score is 50, let's say, and then in here we can write an and, which means do this and something else. We can say and let's say so we call this checkpoint. So you've hit the checkpoint. We're going to need to create another variable, so we'll say public bool as type checkpoint. So what this is saying, that if the score is equal to 50 and checkpoint equals true, because checkpoint, if I give it the proper name here, it will just be equal to true. Now if I do something different and say and if I put an exclamation mark, it will do the opposite to a true value. It will say if it's false and we're equal to 40, then we'll do something else. So now I'll go back, and in my script it will update and checkpoint will appear. Now if I press play, I look at the bottom, you can see it's 0 because we've not reached any of the conditionals. If I type in 40, you can see that from my script is that if checkpoint is false and we reach 40, we'll display the score is 40 because it's currently unticked, which means it's false. Now if I put 50 in the box, you'll notice that because the score isn't equal to 50 and checkpoint is true, it isn't equal to 40 and the checkpoint isn't false, it's something else. So it's displaying that score is 0. Now if I press true, it will say that the score is now equal to 50. So like I've been saying, you can manage any amount of things with doing these if statements. So they're just really checking whatever you need to check. So if is always the thing that you want to start with. If you're having an if and else and want to check other things specific to the first if statement, use else if. Else, if you want to check if it's not equal to anything of the above, then do that. And you can use it in trigger events. You can also use an if statement within a statement itself. So say I get rid of the score equal to 50, and I say within this if statement, if score is equal to 50, and let's remove this checkpoint, then I can say within the statement itself, then if checkpoint is true, and this is pretty much doing the same thing as we did up here, but we're saying that if this is true, then check this. So what it's doing something sort of slightly shorter. So if it doesn't reach this, it will never execute these lines of code. So what again, it's saying that we're just doing it a slightly different way. If score is 50, then it will say that if checkpoint is now true, then it will do this. But if that one is never reached, it will move on, and it will do exactly the same thing. And like I said, you could even do it in here. Then you'll say that else if, you could say something else, checkpoint. So if checkpoint equals true, and then you could do something else, like you've hit checkpoint 2. And then you could have something else here, and you'll need to create yourself a new variable. So like I said, you can have the if statement and then an else if, and you could even use another else statement as well. But it really is, it might seem a little bit complicated, but it takes a lot of practice on your part to just look at everything that you're creating, look at how you want it to be set out and how you want it to work, and then think to yourself, how is the best way that I can use this? So hopefully this cleared up some things and helps you move on with the sort of next part of games programming in C#. So thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.